This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by The Athletic, premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Listeners can get 20% off the first year of an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.com/DSP.
Is the fix for the Michigan football offense simpler than we thought? And hey, did we just experience the best weekend of Michigan sports in recent memory? All that and more next on Michigan Podcast.
There's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deeper into the corner. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it and in. Touchdown Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him. And the leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number. And he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Ron Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team, and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace, and welcome to this week's Michigan Podcast. We're back after a week hiatus, and what a week it was. In fact, more specifically, what a weekend it was, and it might have been the best Michigan sports weekend in recent memory. We'll get into that a little bit more in this week's episode, but we begin with how to fix the Michigan offense. Now that it's official, we know what the Michigan coaching staff will be. The final addition, the new 10th assistant approved by the NCAA for every program in the sport. Michigan's 10th assistant will be former Florida head coach Jim McElwain. And I have to tell you, on the surface, this is one of the oddest pairings in recent history I can think of. The last time I had a reaction to coach coordinator, I know they're calling him the wide receiver coach. But the last time I had a reaction to a coach coordinator tandem that just seemed so oddly paired, it was Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin. That worked out okay. I mean, yeah, it flamed out in spectacular fashion, but up until that point, they worked pretty well together. So if it ends poorly for McElwain and Harbaugh, but before we get to that ending, it's pretty good, I can put up with an awkward divorce, right? Especially if we have a couple of cute kids along the way. So what does this mean for Michigan? And when you look at Jim McElwain's career, you know what? It's actually pretty similar to Jim Harbaugh's. You go back to his first 2 years at Florida, he would have had the exact same record that Jim Harbaugh had his first 2 years at Michigan, except he had a hurricane-canceled game against a lesser foe. They likely would have won. Otherwise, he would have had 10-win seasons his first 2 years, too. And the same trajectory. He has been highly successful on offense everywhere he's gone. From Colorado State, where he had record-setting offenses, to Alabama, where he was a national championship coordinator. And then when he started at Florida, the offense was sensational until they lost Will Grier. What happened at Michigan? Look at Harbaugh's track record. His offenses have been extremely successful everywhere he's gone, going back to San Diego and then to Stanford and then to the 49ers. And then his first year at Michigan, he took the cast off from Iowa, Jake Rudock, and he's now going into his third year of earning a paycheck in the National Football League. He took a cast off from Brady Hoke that he didn't recruit in Wilton Spate and turned him into the third-team All-Big Ten quarterback. And then all of a sudden last year, this was one of the worst offenses in college football. Jim McElwain ultimately, not to mention, the whole fake death threat story, but really if Jim McElwain had fibbed about getting death threats and Florida was 6-1 instead of 3-4, do you think Florida would have fired him for that? Yeah, neither do I. It's similar to what happened to Gary Moeller at Michigan. Gary Moeller did not get fired for causing a drunken scene at a restaurant in 1995. He got fired for going 8-4 2 consecutive years and then causing a drunken scene at a restaurant. All right, if he had caused that scene after he went undefeated and won the Rose Bowl in 92, they wouldn't have fired him, guys. And the same thing true with Jim McElwain. If he had a 6-1 record and had fibbed about getting death threats, he wouldn't have been canned at Florida. He'd still be the coach there. All right, so it always, well, not always, but almost always, unless you're Art Briles and you're a fiend, it almost always comes down to wins and losses. And when you look at what happened with Jim McElwain and you look at Harbaugh, there's this long track record of tremendous success, and then it just suddenly stops. So you ask yourself, is there a common denominator? Yeah, turns out there is. And we have charts and graphs, and I'll have charts and graphs and pretty graphics later on in this episode, and those things are great. Facts are great. I love data. I love metrics. I love analytics. We're going to talk a lot about that during the course of the offseason, but I'm reminded of one of the great lines from the late, great Keith Jackson. Analyzing can be paralyzing. When you look at Jim McElwain, it's funny. Guy was a great offensive mind until his starting quarterback at Florida was a guy that when he transferred to North Carolina or when he left the university, couldn't get a starting job at any other school. And when his quarterback was Will Grier, he was really good. When you look at Jim Harbaugh, offensive genius until his quarterback's John O'Corn. Then, suddenly a moron. Even more than the X's and O's, it is the Jimmies and the Joes. Is Nick Saban a great coach because he had the number one recruiting class 7 years in a row? Or is it the fact that he had the number one recruiting class 7 years in a row the reason he's a great coach? And the answer, of course, is yes. All right? So there's only so far brilliance will take you when you're lining up with your third-string quarterback, or you're lining up with a quarterback that didn't fit your offense and isn't as good as the guy you lost, then yeah, you're not as good. Now, of course, those coaches are responsible for procuring, recruiting, and developing quarterbacks. But maybe it's just this simple. And that doesn't mean the offensive line play does not need improvement, but there's a lot of teams in college football that won at a high level. They didn't have great offensive lines. Alabama did not have a great offensive line this year, but by their standards. They won the national championship. All right, so yeah, there needs to be improvement there for sure. But when you have a quarterback that has Johnny Manziel-like escapability, suddenly your offensive line looks a lot better, when you're not a sitting duck back there. Know what I'm saying? So maybe the fix for the Michigan offense is much simpler than we thought. Maybe it's been hidden in plain sight all this time. Maybe it doesn't really matter who the 10th assistant is. Maybe it doesn't really matter if Pep and Drevno stay. Maybe it really matters if Shea Patterson is eligible or not. And it just is that simple. Back here on Michigan Podcast, and there's a look at our Patreon page. And if you stop right there for just a second, you'll notice that while we were off last week, I put together a podcast, 4 weeks till Selection Sunday, where Michigan basketball stands. And that kind of was able to tide you over while we took a 1 week hiatus since signing day. And if you're one of the folks that is supporting us on Patreon, you got to take advantage of that. You got to listen to that. And we greatly appreciate your support. I know a lot of you ask us, hey, what can we do to get more content from you guys? Well, keep in mind, we are taking time away from the stuff that actually feeds our families to put this together as a labor of love every single week. And so if there is a group of you out there that says, hey, we really support what you're doing, we want more of it. This is one surefire way to get us to open up more of our schedule to produce even more content. And plus, if you're a Patreon supporter, you get access to exclusive content separate from what we put out here for free on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube every week as well. So check us out. Check us out at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Back here on Michigan Podcast, I'm Steve Deace. Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor will be joining us here a little bit later on. But I know I just said analyzing is paralyzing, but it doesn't mean you just want to dumb it down either. There are some data metrics I want us to look at this week on the podcast because there are 3 positive trends for Michigan football. I'm getting accused now. Steve, you've gone negative. Really, I'm just giving you the weather forecast, guys. All right, it's not like I like losing. Okay, I freaking hate it, man. All right, I hate having the pit in my stomach every time Michigan football comes up. All right, so my kid goes as Jim Harbaugh for Halloween. I'm not enjoying this. I wish I could tell you every day it's 85 and sunny with no humidity. Instead, I'm telling you every day is a winding road, Sheryl Crow. Okay, I'm not enjoying it, is what I'm trying to tell you. All right, but to show that I'm not a nattering nabob, I don't have to make stuff up. There actually are some positive data trends for Michigan football heading into 2018. In fact, there's 3 we're going to focus on right now. Here's the very first one. The numbers, not my opinion, but the numbers say that Jim Harbaugh is recruiting at an elite level nationally. If you look at the 3-year recruiting averages, now why did I use 3 years? Because Harbaugh's only recruited 3 full classes at Michigan, okay? Because the first year obviously didn't take over till right around New Year's Day, and it was by then most of the recruiting cycle was done after the firing of Brady Hoke. So when you look at 3 full-year recruiting averages, here's where Michigan ranks. These are numbers according to 24/7's composite rankings. This is the average point score of the last 3 classes, and you see Ohio State is way out in front. What Urban Meyer's doing is ridiculous right now. But they're at number 2, a clear number 2. Is Michigan under Jim Harbaugh, then Penn State under James Franklin, and then there's a big drop-off. Michigan State is 4th, but it doesn't include Michigan State lost 5 of its top 9 recruits from the 2016 class because of off-the-field problems, sexual assault investigations, etc. Now, here are coaches at big-name schools that have recruited the last 3 years at the same school. Now, obviously, Nick Saban and Alabama are on a astral plane under themselves. But here, if you look at Gus Malzahn in Auburn, Dabo Swinney at Clemson, Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, David Shaw at Stanford, Chris Peterson at Washington, Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, and you'll notice those are some of the top programs in the sport right now. Their 3-year recruiting averages, according to 24/7 Sports, are lower than Harbaugh's. And that includes what we all consider to be an okay, decent, but overall disappointing class that was just signed in 2018. Now, I am not saying, and these numbers are not saying Michigan is more talented than Clemson, for example. All right, Dabo Swinney's been there for nearly a decade. They have a talent pipeline Michigan doesn't have because our coach has been here for 3 years. All right? I mean, so we're not saying Michigan's as talented as Clemson. What we are saying, though, on the current trajectory we're on, if we stay on that trajectory, Michigan's going to be. Now, the question is, was this last recruiting class the signal of a downward trend that Harbaugh's lost his mojo? Or was it a blip on the radar screen because things look pretty strong for 2019? But we kind of thought at this point in 2018 as well. But it does mean right now, over the 3 years that Harbaugh's had a full calendar year to recruit, the trajectory is what you want to see. It's at an elite level. Which brings us to trend number 2. Michigan is one of 21 schools most likely to make the college football playoff this fall. Why do I say that? Because 14 of the 16 college football playoff teams have averaged a top 25 recruiting class or better the 4 years leading up to their playoff berth. Here are the teams that can say that now heading into this fall, and we have in bold there 3 teams from the Big Ten: Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. Nebraska, by the way, just misses the cut. They have averaged a top 26 recruiting class the last 4 years. All right, but there you can see it's pretty likely at least three of the four college football playoff teams, when those get finalized this December, are on that list right there. And Michigan is one of those 21 teams, if the trend holds, most likely to make the college football playoff this fall. Which brings us to our third and final trend. Michigan is one of 12 schools to most likely win the national championship this fall. Now, why do we say that? Well, since 1996, no college football national champion has had fewer than 2 top 10 consensus recruiting classes in the 4 years leading up to winning the national title. Here are the 12 schools that meet that criteria heading into this fall, and you see them there on the right of your screen. And there's only 2 Big Ten teams that can say that, Ohio State and Michigan. Those are the 12 schools that have had at least 2 top 10 consensus recruiting classes heading into the 2018 season. So, no, not all of the news is bad. I mean, and let's just quickly take a pause. Before Jimmy arrived, we were selling tickets with the purchase of a Coke Zero, okay? That's a metaphor alert. No one is denying our program is leaps and bounds in better shape than it was. The debate is not whether Jim's a good coach, not whether he's done here a good job, not whether we're going to win a lot of games. That's not the debate. The debate is he our Nick Saban? Is he our Urban Meyer? Or is he Lloyd Carr, who, by the way, is in the Hall of Fame, guys, but, had every 3 or 4 years an 8-5 kind of season, and then a lot of 10-win seasons. Had one national championship, but only one other team that Lloyd coached was really a serious player in the national championship race, and that was the 2016 that lost to Ohio State. So the argument is he going to be Lloyd Carr with a more high-profile social media presence, or is he going to be our Urban Meyer, Nick Saban? That's the debate that hasn't been settled yet. And when you look at these 2 trend lines and advantages we have going into this season, it might get settled this fall. There's a look at The Athletic, our partners here on Michigan Podcast, some of the best online sports commentary you'll find anywhere on the interwebs over at The Athletic. And right now, through our partners at Detroit Sports Podcast, you can get a discounted subscription to The Athletic. Promo code DSP, D as in David, SP as in Paul, DSP, promo code DSP at theathletic.com. Back here on Michigan Podcast, joined by Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. After what was one of the best weekends Michigan sports fans have had in quite a while. We will get to that in a moment, Michael, but we got to start with the news that became official today. Jim McElwain, the former Florida football coach, is now officially a member of Michigan's coaching staff. They're saying his title is wide receivers coach, but he has let it be known in several interviews that he will have more of a role in game planning and coordinating the offense. So your immediate reaction to this news?
Well, at the end of the day, we had talked about this before you and I had, Steve, that Jim Harbaugh was not going to go hire a Don Brown because he doesn't need a Don Brown. He doesn't want a Don Brown. Jim Harbaugh is Don Brown. Bringing somebody in like Jim McElwain, I know that there's like this negative backlash for a lot of Michigan fans because he failed at Florida, but he was a big-time success, won 2 national championships as the offensive coordinator at Alabama. He was a very successful coach and turned Colorado State into a program that obviously landed him the Florida job. I think when you look at offensive coaches out there, he's always seemingly had a pretty sharp mind. He knows how to run an effective offense that relies much more on spread than on pro style. To me, that's probably the biggest question I have is how do you mesh these 2 styles together? We had heard a year ago that Pep Hamilton was going to bring in more spread concepts, and we never saw it. Jim Harbaugh ultimately kind of negated that. Now you're bringing in another guy that is supposedly a little bit more of a spread type of coach. I think I'm happy about it if this is the result. And what we've heard is it very well could be is that Tim Drevno is no longer going to be suggesting plays during the game that Jim Harbaugh is ultimately going to call. Pep Hamilton's not going to be suggesting these plays. It's going to be Jim McElwain talking into the headset and Jim Harbaugh making the final call. And if that means that Tim Drevno is focused on the offensive line, Pep Hamilton's focused on the quarterbacks, then I think this is a good day for Michigan football.
Who gets blamed for fade routes to Eddie McDoom next year, Michael?
God, anybody but Eddie McDoom, I'll have to say that. I was having that conversation with Sam Webb from the Michigan Insider on WTKA on Tuesday morning, and we kind of laughed about that one. But you laugh about it, and yet it still pains you when it laughed about it, right? It's like that. It just kind of stabs you in the chest a little bit. So if at the end of the day, you know what, Steve, frankly, if this offense doesn't work in 2018, then the person that needs to get blamed for it is Jim Harbaugh, flat out. That's the guy that makes all the decisions. That's the guy that, when he preaches meritocracy, is unwilling to move a coach if they don't find a job on their own. So this is his offense. He's the quarterback whisperer. This is his team. If Michigan offense is bad again in 2018 like they were in 2017, then the buck stops with Jim Harbaugh.
When you look at these two guys' careers in McElwain and Harbaugh, their personas are completely different. Him and his program when he was at Florida in the lead up to the game last September, throughout the summer, they were talking so much junk. It just seems like an odd pairing. But when you look at their careers, they've actually been very similar. Their records heading into last season were actually identical, except for one game. Florida had a hurricane-canceled game against a lesser foe. They likely would have won. Otherwise, he would have been at 10-3 both of his first 2 years, just as Jim Harbaugh was. And they were considered offensive gurus who had tremendous success on that side of the ball at all of their previous stops. And then it just sort of immediately stopped at this particular juncture in college football. And if you're looking for one common denominator, for all the analyzing and everything else we do, and I do it too, you do it every day, we do it every week, is it just as simple as you can be a great offensive mind all you want. But when your quarterback is Will Grier, you're really smart. When your quarterback's a guy that left your program and couldn't even win the starting job at a North Carolina team that went 2-10, you're not. And when your quarterback is a guy who's on his second year playing in the NFL, or Andrew Luck, you're smart. And when your quarterback's John O'Korn, you're not. Could it just be that simple to what happened to McElwain and Harbaugh in their careers at the exact same time, Michael?
I think it could be that simple. I would add in there, Steve, that, and I mean, I know you know this too, is that I don't think either one of them had very good offensive lines. Their first 3 years, I think they almost to some extent, their first 2 years got by with smoke and mirrors with really talented skill position players, good enough running games, and really great defenses that led them to those 10-win seasons. And then when you don't have those other elements working in your favor, then all of a sudden you need to rely on your quarterback, you need to rely on your offensive line, and both coaches didn't have them. But you know what, Steve, is even though we can say that, it's still the responsibility of those coaches to be in year three, to be in a better position where you're not having to start your third string quarterback. You're not in a position where if your first guy goes down, you're relying on two. I mean, that's the biggest indictment of Jim Harbaugh, is that he had a fifth-year senior and he had a redshirt freshman that was supposedly the golden child, and neither one of them were even close to being ready to win big games and important games at the University of Michigan in 2017. And so that is, you can say that he didn't have the luck of the injury situation, or he didn't have the right quarterback, but it's his job to bring that right quarterback in and develop that quarterback. And for Jim McElwain, it's his job to have a plan in place if he doesn't have Will Grier anymore. And neither one of these guys did a very good job when they didn't have their 5-star NFL first-round draft pick. And you know what? You're not always going to have a first-round draft pick as your starting quarterback, and you still have to find a way. And he did that in 2015 with Jake Rudock, but he didn't even come close to doing that in his last 2 years.
Final question, football-related, then we'll move on quickly to basketball and hockey. You asked on your Twitter feed today, now that the coaching staff is complete, are you more optimistic, more pessimistic? My official position on that question is I have no official position on optimism or pessimism until I know for certain Shea Patterson's eligibility. What are your thoughts?
No, I saw your tweet to me on this, and I really do agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, we can talk about optimism and hope, and that's really what I was trying to get at, is whether or not Michigan fans have started to have some hope yet again for the 2018 football season. Because if you remember, if you go back to January 1st, I mean, and really the whole month of January, and then the signing day came and went the last couple of weeks ago. I mean, it was pretty dreadful to be a Michigan fan. There was really no reason to get excited if you were looking into the 2018 football season in the future. And so I'm just wondering if there's a little bit of optimism that has been swelling to the surface. But I agree with you. I mean, until Shea Patterson get ruled eligible, and really until we see September 1st. I mean, for me, Michigan needs to come out there in that game against Notre Dame and almost quasi what we saw in 2006 when Michigan went down to South Bend and just absolutely kicked the crap out of the Fighting Irish. I don't know that it needs to be that dramatic, a 20-something point win where they really just blew the doors off of Notre Dame. But, until I see them go down to South Bend, win a tough game on the road, an offense that looks like it can be beyond competent, then you really can't get too excited about anything with this 2018 football season.
Michael Spath from WTKA is here with us. Quickly, let's talk about what happened over the weekend, because, when the football team is struggling, you kind of think the sky is falling. But if you look everywhere else in Michigan athletics, things are looking pretty good right now. And so you had men's basketball beating a top 10 Ohio State. You had hockey sweeping number 1 Notre Dame. You even had softball beating a top 10 Florida State. You look at Michigan's success in Olympic sports like lacrosse, swimming and diving. The baseball program bringing in one of its best recruiting classes really in recent memory. Across the board, other than football, this is one of the better times we've had as Michigan fans, Michael.
Well, I've said this a couple of times, Steve, and I wonder if you'd agree with me. But when you look at it, especially if Jim Harbaugh can really get his thing going here, this might be the best collection of coaches that Michigan has ever had at any point in time when you go across the gamut of sports. I mean, even you throw in, baseball with Eric Bakich. Obviously, we know what Carol Hutchins has been doing for softball for 20-plus years. But look at, what Mark Rosen does with the volleyball team, and Marsha Pankratz has field hockey back to being a national championship contender. Mel Pearson has proven to be, I know it's early, it's his first year, but I think Mel Pearson has truly proven to be exactly the candidate you wanted to bring in to replace Red Berenson, a guy that knew how to win the Michigan way, where you can out-talent everybody, but also understand that when you have a program like Michigan Tech and how college hockey has changed over the last 5 to 8 years, where older players, 4-year players are starting to be the teams are successful. And so he knows how to blend those two. John Beilein is as good as it gets. I mean, in my lifetime, there's never been a coach at Michigan in basketball. Steve Fisher be damned, and Bill Frieder, and whoever else you want to throw out there. This is, in my opinion, the best coach in the history of Michigan basketball, and he's coaching in this particular era. And you go down the list over and over and over again. Golf and like I said, field hockey and rowing and swimming and diving with Mike Bottom winning Big Ten championships, both the women's team and the men's team. And Joe McFarland for wrestling has got his team poised to contend for the national championship. I mean, we are really, really lucky right now as Michigan fans. But, of course, it doesn't feel that way unless the football team is right up there competing for national championships and Big Ten titles.
That is well said. And we could be looking at, if women's basketball can get its act together, we could be looking at all 3 of those sports taking part in March Madness, which I think hasn't happened, since 2011. So it's been several years since that's occurred. And I think both men's basketball and hockey, depending on the draw, could really go a long way in March. I think if Michigan can stay away from teams that have multiple skilled bigs, and there's not a lot of those in college basketball right now, which is one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of elite teams. But if they can stay away from that sort of a team in their immediate region, then I think they are a very difficult matchup, as John Beilein's teams offensively always are, Michael, but especially we're now talking about a team that is top 20 nationally in defensive efficiency. And then you look at hockey. If you're sweeping the clear number one team in the country at this late juncture of the season, then you are absolutely a threat to go all the way in that particular sport. So I think draw-wise, both those programs could make major noise. Your thoughts on that quickly before we let you go?
Well, wouldn't it be a little bit, I don't know if ironic's the right way to look at it, but when you consider all those great teams that Red Berenson had, And he never he won 2 national championships, but he should have won again probably in 2003. He should have won again in 2008, and he should have won again in 2011. And he finished, he went to a couple final Frozen Fours, and he lost the national championship in 2011. The one thing that Red Berenson's teams never were able to do is they were never able to sneak up on the competition, and they were never able to win beyond what they were already expected to win. They were expected to win a national championship every year, and so he never was able to take anybody by surprise. Here you go, Mel Pearson, his first year. How interesting would it be if a team that, is maybe probably a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, maybe a 3 seed, depending on the next 2 weekends go, if they were to advance the Frozen Four and kind of be that team that catches everybody by surprise. And I think it could happen. I'm not planning on it. I think at the end of the day, Michigan hockey is still probably 2 years away from having the type of talent at the offensive position, at the forward position, to really contend for a national championship. But they've got a goalie playing really well, and they've got a defensive core that's really locked in, and so that's certainly helping them. With basketball, first round, I think that you look at this team, and definitely you win the first round, they're going to be the higher seed. They're going to be favored. March Madness is such a crapshoot after that because you have no idea who your second-round matchup is. You have no idea if you make it to the Sweet 16, how hot the team you're playing, what that matchup is. I would like to see, I think Michigan should be shooting for the Sweet 16, and anything after that is kind of gravy at this point, just because I don't think that they have quite the firepower that you need to win a national championship in basketball, unless Mo Wagner, unless Muhammad Ali Abdul-Rahman, and the third name I'd throw at you, Jordan Poole, unless those 3 guys just become en fuego in the postseason and kind of have like a Derek Walton type of run, I don't see enough firepower, enough offensive talent for Michigan to go all the way. But I do think that it's going to be a very fun postseason. It's been, let's face it, beating Michigan State and Ohio State in the same year, it's been a very fun regular season for Michigan basketball fans already. And sometimes we forget to really relish when we're in the moment. I'm trying to appreciate a little bit more in the moment and definitely really enjoy the post-game euphoria that comes from beating a couple of rivals. Because let's face it, Steve, it doesn't happen in football, so we got to enjoy what happens in basketball.
No, that is well said. By the way, Michigan, one of just 23 teams in college basketball right now to be ranked in the top 50 nationally in both offensive and defensive efficiency, according to KenPom. That's only 23 teams in the country. Oh, by the way, the 23rd team on that list is Michigan's next game, Penn State, on Wednesday night.
One more for you, too. I think, because Zach was talking about this today, I think that Michigan is the only school in the country to have a top 20 ranked hockey team, a top 20 ranked basketball team right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You bet. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Go Blue. We'll talk to you next week, okay?
All right. Sounds good, Steve. Thanks very much.
All right. Take care. That's Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. And if you missed any of the highlights of Michigan's big win over top 10 Ohio State to close out the home schedule and senior day on Sunday, check this out.
Michigan and Ohio State, we've been alluding to it throughout the show. That game has gone final in Ann Arbor. Pick it up in the first half with the Wolverines down by 1. And this kind of typified this game. The hustle, Wagner, the great save, ball on the floor, the scrum. It looks like Michigan-Ohio State football. And you understand the rivalry inherent in this one when you look at Mo Wagner. Now Jordan Poole, what a great ball game Poole had. He's been a little quiet after the good starts of the year, but he finished with 15, the nice step back crossover. Jordan Poole just getting hot. To lead all Michigan scores with 12 points in the first half. Final seconds of the half, it's Keita Bates-Diop, who did not have a vintage offensive game, but he does hit the 3 there. Buckeyes go into the half down by 5. Bates-Diop just 5 of 17 from the floor, but it's a big one here to get the Buckeyes to within 4. But Michigan always seemed to have the answer. Here it's Poole. Off the feed from Abdur-Rahman and sticks the 3. Wolverines up 60-52. They hit just 7 threes in this game, but certainly some timely ones. Abdur-Rahman draining one there. 17 points for him. Michigan up by 12. And then off the loose ball, it is Wagner. And the foul and the flex as the Wolverines win it by the final of 74-62.
This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, do you approve of adding former Florida head coach Jim McElwain to the Michigan coaching staff? And only 31% of you believe that this move jumps the shark. See what I did there? Yeah, I'm here all week. Try the veal. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry for that. The other 69% of you think that it is a very good move to make a former SEC head coach your 10th assistant. That brings us to our question of the week. Joe asks, how big of a role does Michigan's prestigious if you prefer, academic reputation play in football recruiting? Joe, the answer is not nearly as much as you would prefer. And, Michigan fans, we like to tout the academic reputation of their university ahead of Ohio State. We know Ohio State is not the commuter school that it used to be. I think as recently as 2015, it was ranked one of the top 20 public universities in the country. So if you're an elite academic kid, which is like 1% of the kids you would want Michigan to sign to its football class, then it matters to you. If you're Nicholas Petit-Frere, who did not sign here but at Ohio State instead, and he got mocked by some Michigan fans, well, you don't really care about academics. Well, when you've watched in your lifetime, put it this way, okay? In the lifetime of the young men that just signed this year for the class of 2018, they have seen, in their lifetimes, they have seen Purdue beat Michigan as often as Michigan has beaten Ohio State on the gridiron, guys, okay? So if Ohio State can tell you we're a top 20 public university, and oh, by the way, we're a top 5 program in college football, then yeah, you do care about academics. But you can win a lot of football games, too. Not to mention, you can do what Myron Rolle did. Go to Florida State, win a lot of football games, and then go get a Rhodes Scholarship as a grad student. You can always go to Michigan. You want to go to Michigan's business school or law school or highly decorated med school? Do that as a grad student. Ohio State's a fine undergrad school, and you'll win a lot of football games as well. It doesn't play nearly the role we think it does. You know what means a lot more? Michigan having 19 of its players in NFL training camps last July. That means a lot more. So get better players, which, as we showed you earlier in this podcast, Michigan is doing. And now it is time to use those better players to win bigger games. And if you do that, then you're going to suddenly find all kinds of kids love Michigan's academic reputation because they can win a lot of football games that matter too. Let us know what you think about what we think. Follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Want to thank our friends and partners at Detroit Sports Podcast for getting the word out about this episode each week as well. Our good friend Michael Spath at WTKA in Ann Arbor, as well as the Michigan Insider. Everybody that takes part in making this possible every week, thank you. Next week, a very special episode. I will unveil what I predict to be the NCAA tournament field on Selection Sunday. Don't miss it. Until then, go Blue.